after the day one and day two of the IDPS, India Data Protection Summit. We are having a very interesting discussions going on, and thrilled by the sessions that are being held. Uh, Today we have with us for the keynote Rajesh Kumar Vishwanathan, Senior Group Manager, Privacy and Data Protection Office at Infosys. Rajesh is currently in role of Senior Group Manager, Privacy and Data Protection Office at Infosys. He's a law graduate and also certified in field of privacy and information security, awarded fellowship in information privacy by IAP in 2016. Rajesh held long positions with IAP, Asia Advisory Board during 2017 till 19, and currently he's serving as Training Advisory Board and India Marketing Advisory Group at IAP. In addition, volunteered with Data Security Council of India, ISACA. He's also part of Foundation of Data Privacy Professionals in India. Rajesh has from time has given so many inputs to FDPPI and even helped his fellow members. In public front, Rajesh lectures and conducts seminars, discussions regularly at forums on big data, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, privacy, security, and data protection. We welcome you, Rajesh, today for the session. The floor is to you.
Thanks, Anvita.
Yes, Rajesh.
Can I come on the video or is it?
Yeah, please, Rajesh, please go ahead. Let us know if you have any issues. Yeah, we can see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So a very sweet good evening to all. I'm sure yesterday sessions as well as today's morning session prior to me has been as interesting as per, and insightful as well. And I hope I can make and keep it to the expectations of all the audiences here. Thanks again for FDPPI giving me this opportunity to be part of this wonderful conference, which really imbibes much of key awareness on some of the key domains and topics covered under the privacy domain. And thanks again for all the stakeholders here, as well as personal thanks to Mr. Navi as well. And Sanagita, thanks for the wonderful introduction. So, coming to the topic, let me just present my slides and hope please do confirm if the slide is present is seeable. Can you please confirm whether the slide is okay?
Yes, it's visible. Yeah.
Okay. So, meeting the SEC requirements, I think this is one of the biggest buzz terminology that post-CREMS 2 and GDPR has been kept at a lot of organizations on bay, trying to keep thinking about privacy as one of the key board items. So let me take this opportunity to just explore more in terms and try to provide as much as information on the SEC and what it is, how its origin is, where are we right now, and in the current new requirements, how are we trying to see if the organizations ensure compliance from a day-to-day operational perspective. So this is a tentative, it's a kind of a timeline that we can look at how this concept evolved. So in EU, when the EU directive was passed way back in 1995, there was a mention in Article 25, which talks about one of the requirements about cross-border data transfers. But until 2004, there was no such kind of a standard template that the authority or the Article 29 working group in the previous instances have been able to publish it. So in 2004, the C2C, which is the controller to controller template, was published. And when we mean controller to controller, where both the entities, which is the exporter as well as the importer, both are controllers from their own business standpoint, and their collection and processing of these transfers from one entity and to the receiving entity, which is the data importer, but a independent controller by itself, had to comply with some of these standard terminologies and requirements. In 2010, the much of the questions that industry was foreseen is about in terms of a template which was expected to be for meeting the requirements of a controller to processor, mostly client engagements in place, and there were two subsequent versions to it. However, that was published and it was coming into force. One of the gap was that particular template was not much, uh, centric to subprocessors, which is in the EU directive terms, you have processor and a subprocessor, and the SEC applicability to that was typically most of the organizations use the same 2010 template, as there was no separate document. Even though it was in existence, there was an ad hoc template that was issued, but they were not formally published. In 2018, GDPR came into effect, and between 2010 and 2018, I'm sure everybody is aware of the saga of 2015 Schrems 1 ruling, which invalidated the safe harbor and resulted in the birth of Privacy Shield as part of one of the standard framework. In 2020, the Schrems 2 ruling again brought in the major change, a rampant change, which not only looked at more from a cross-border data transfer perspectives in those countries which have surveillance laws similar to ones in US, which was the subject matter in contention in the Schrems against Facebook in front of the Ireland Data Protection Commissioner. And while the CJU stated that ruling that the privacy shield is no more valid and it is not acceptable to meet the standards set by the European laws. At the same time, the CJU happened to also promulgate that it becomes a responsibility of the entities to make sure that there are additional checks and balances carried out to ensure that the destination country meets with some of the requirements of a cross-border requirements, however, provided in line with the local laws. And in 2021, so in order to balance both GDPR as well as the Schrems 2 requirement, the standard contractual clauses, which was supposed to be released in 2020, was kept in abeyance. And finally, on June 4th, the new templates got published. The subsequent fact is there were two templates that were published, but they used the same terminology. One is uh, the version 914, which is typically about the cross-border data transfer, and the other one is 915, which is typically more from the data processing agreement perspective. That means if you have to, in a legal terminology, you to speak about it, 914 is in line with reference to Article 46, 2, Para 2C, which is on the standard contractual clauses overseeing cross-border data transfers. And 915 is basically the template that is issued by the European Commission in line with Article 28, Para 7 of the GDPR. So these two versions are different, but unfortunately, probably without any proper hindsight, they both were termed as standard contractual clauses. That has led to a lot of discussions in the. I'm sure there will be some questions around that, but that was published on June 4th, and it became operational on June 27, 2021, where the new SEC templates became operational. And there was 18-month transition timeline that was left so that the all the organizations shall ensure compliance to it. So when we look at the 3-month transition timeline plus a 15-month transition timeline, uh, till September 27, 2021, the old templates were still valid. That means parties who are in getting into a new processing, which was during that time, can still execute the old templates, provided by December 2022, they get revised and updated on the new templates. So the additional 15 months can be taken up depending on the requirements. So with effect from December 27, 2022, any cross-bordering that transfer that is happening should be based on the new templates only. At the same time, any new processing that is happening as on September 27, 2021 and going forward should be only based on the new templates, and the old templates that were issued under the EU directive, which was still in force until that time, got totally obsolete in nature. So this was a typical transition timeline based on which the processing the new templates and the old templates adoptions have been carried out. So to say about it, it's just the goes with the old comes the new. With that, it is basically applicable to both data controllers as well as data processors. And some of the highlights of this particular standard contractual clauses is more in terms of there were a lot of feasibilities, benefits as well, but some things which are really a part and portion which had been of a greater assistance to a lot of organizations from a privacy domain is its modular approach, where a same template was adopted, which can be used between either from a controller to controller or a controller to processor, also from processor to processor, and last but not the least, processor to controller. So these are different four different modules that were generated, and it also had a capability of docking clause, which really helped where in order to reduce the administrative burden of executing multiple documentations between multiple parties, the document which has been executed in a particular engagement can include a new party to the same document and make them as responsible for the terms and conditions that have been agreed with. So this is really the beneficiary. One other item which is of a major highlight that started getting much more attention, even though it was there as part of the old SEC template, which I'm sure most of the people would not have reviewed one of these clauses. In the new template, there were additional third-party beneficiary rights which were extended primarily to data subjects, where these rights extended to the data subjects can reach out directly to the service provider and seek a copy at a cost of the free of cost, and also in certain cases sue directly the service provider, not just the client, for any financial compensations for any violations or breaches that have been reported to. And the highlight number four, which is one of the most important thing, and that's why there was an additional 1 year delay of the release of the SCC, was it's trying to make sure that the requirements identified under the Schrems 2 ruling are complied appropriately with it in terms of obligations during government access, where what is the roles and responsibilities of a data importer where they get a data access request by a government authority, and what are the obligations that needs to be complied, as more in terms from a contractual guarantees that will the parties need to sign off. And these are mostly non-debatable. These are clauses which I'm specifically talking from 914, which is on the cross-border data transfer. The whole session here is more from the 914, not on the 915. So this is more limited to cross-border data transfers only. And last but not the least, one of the major highlight is additionally from a Schrems 2 ruling, it also emphasized that the requirement for the data exporters, and at the same time in most of the cases also on the data importers, to conduct a transfer impact assessment as part of any kind of cross-border data processing involved into the engagement. Now, the overview of the standard contractual clauses is literally split into four major sections. When we talk from section one, talking from it's more of a general, such as provisions containing from an introductory provisions, what are the third-party rights, the interpretation of the requirements of certain clauses, the hierarchy of documentations that have been executed, and the details of transfers covered and any access mechanism, which is typically nothing but your docking requirements, specifically addressing who are the parties and what is the nature and subject and scope of the processing that is part and parcel of that particular standard contractual process. Section 2 is much more modular in nature, which is specifically addressed where, depending on the nature of engagement, depending on the nature of parties and relationship and their relationship in part of the engagement, what kind of a modular approach that can be deployed, and those clauses getting added as part of the standard contractual clauses execution. Section 3 is more from a general with edits, where you are the local laws and practices which are affecting the compliance with the clauses. And as long as these clauses are editable to the extent where the conditions and requirements of the baseline that has been justified by the European Commission doesn't get defeated. So anything that goes beyond the threshold is acceptable, but anything that goes beyond the threshold provided by the European Commission, that is definitely not something which any of the parties can overrule to that effect. And similarly comes with the general with edits in terms of non-compliance and termination, governing law and jurisdiction. This is typically from in terms of what is the governing law. Is it the governing law based on where the data exporter is established, or where the data subject is established, or depending on where the establishment is conducting its business. So on these basis, you can choose those clauses applicable to different modules, and based on that, execute the parties. Now, the benefit, in addition to this, you also have the Swiss, which is basically not the European part of the European Union, but it is part of the wider sector of European Economic Area. And it has also released and adopted the same GDPR versions. But if there are any kind of Switzerland data subjects involved as part of the processing, you need to ensure having an additional annexure where the compliance and requirements, specifically in line with Section 3 and Section 4, should address its compliance with the Federal Data Protection Act 1992, or the new act that comes into existence. This annexure is a must and mandated in order to ensure your compliance from the laws of Switzerland perspective. Now, among these things of major clauses that we see potentially from a scenario where there are a lot of challenges that comes in terms of applying to how these particular data obligations can be complied by the parties, specifically in these cases. Now, when it comes to onward transfers, the onward transfers is very much vital, wherever there is an onward transfer, and this is some additional inclusion as part of the new SECs, that if suppose a processing is only with a country, say third country, which is such as India, and in addition to that, if there's a further processing where one of the project member is currently situated and operating from, say, Singapore, and in that case, this an onward transfer? Yes, definitely it's an onward transfers. So in most of these cases, you need to have the data controller or the data exporter duly notified, and make sure your records of processing, make sure your compliance with requirements of 47 are duly complied with prior to any such processing exercise taking place. Now, when we talk about redress, redress is one of the key provision under the new SEC template, which clearly demands that to make sure that anything that goes wrong needs to be set appropriate, and that needs to be attended on more priority. So, as part of redressal rights, the data subjects, it's not neither the data exporter nor the importer. More preference is actually provided to data subjects who can raise grievances, who can make sure that the rights and their third party, the beneficiary rights that they possess as part of these requirements, are duly protected and adhered. Liability and indemnification. At any time of the party, the primary person who is accountable will always be the data controller. However, in terms of what you are mapping with your MSA requirements, if your obligations does excel in kind of open up for any kind of liability or damages that is arising or resulting out of any breaches that puts data exporter at dismay, the data importer is ending up the pay the consequences. And even if there are subcons involved or a sub-processor involved, even in those cases, the primary accountability from a contractual engagement will still hold the data importer duly accountable. And when we talk data importer, we are talking primarily, a data importer, just the main party who is acting as a processor to the initial client engagements. Warranty, it's a kind of a little bit twist of, after all, laying out some of the stringent provisions, and finally from a warranty perspective, adding a clause was added to meets to stay that at the time of the engagement, at the time of the due diligence carried out between the parties, where the transfer impact assessment in the country reasonably believes that there is no kind of much impact to the data getting processed in the countries due to their local laws. If that is kind of an assumption based on which the engagement can proceed, yes, that warranty is also being extended, and however, it can be overruled from a legal obligation standpoint. The last but not the least, one of the most essential ticket is, we will see most of the organizations, we use standard templates that we incorporate. You will see a standard technical and organizational controls that will be part of your MSA. The same template you will also see it as an annexure as part of the DPA, and you will see the same annexure referenced under the standard contractual clauses also. In practice, this is actually not the right way of executing most of the contracts, even though a standard based industry practice has adopted that as kind of a much more favorable way. So when we look at an MSA, these are three different documents which has three different purposes. Yes, of course, the MSA stands and serves as a parent mother document, which actually covers not just the privacy, but it also covers some of the terms and conditions that have been agreed between the parties across, in terms of proprietary information, intellectual property information, also as part of personal information being processed as part of the engagement. But when you look at data processing agreement, or the DPA, which we commonly term it as, it is essential where, as part of that engagement, if there are personal data being processed, then the requirements laid down under laws such as like in GDPR Article 28 s- request all the parties to sign and ensure there is a written contract which is adopting most of the provisions laid down under Article 28 of the GDPR. Now, what it means that any entity who is acting on behalf of the instructors of the controller should have this DPA signed where personal data is processed. Except if the data is incidental in nature, then you don't need to sign a DPA as part of the practice. Now, this document is signed irrespective whether the processor is located within you or is it outside you, doesn't matter. It is a requirement that DPA has to be signed. Where does SEC come? SEC comes only when there is a DPA, and if that DPA involves certain personal data, out of which few are processed outside in the third country. In such instance, the parties needs to execute the SEC. So that is one of the major requirements that you need, the threshold that you need to set in. Say, for example, if there is a meeting that has been scheduled between a client who is based out in, say, Finland, and the person, the data processor representative who is attending the project team members are attending a call from, say, Philippines. Now, is this necessary where need to conclude DPA? Because when the calendar invite is sent, we have the emails of the employees who will be part of the call. Answer is no, because these are transactions which are incidental in nature, and you don't need to have a DPA exactly in place. So the same kind of interpretation in a much narrow scope should drive down to your SEC, which should clearly lay out that out of these number of personal data that is generally being processed, there are certain kind of services which will get operated or processed from a third country, and that data elements involves only few. In some cases, if the engagement is totally about offshoring, it's fine. But if it is only limited, then your SCC scope is supposed to include only that limited portion, not the entire section of your annexure that is being defined in your DPA should not retrospectively be captured in your SCC. The same terms it goes with your technical and organizational controls. So any controls that is applicable to the nature of processing being transmitted at the same time being processed in the third country. What controls is just applicable to that data processing should generally be covered. And if you see this new SEC template, this has been very explicitly called out, and ensuring that the parties would be very specific. They should not be just blindly putting a generic standard template which is not adopted or accepted from the law perspective. These are some of the benefits and challenges. The SEC has a modular approach with a one single point of entry. It provides greater control on sub-processors engaged by entity outside India, so that you have every party by means of a docking clause put into a new document. And the terms and conditions are also appropriately, since because of its modular approach, can be systematically maintained and tracked for compliance per se. And last but not the least, the warranty or the risk-based approach for third country assessments that have been incorporated as some kind of a little bit of a relief for most of these entities who are trying to meet SCRIMS 3 compliance. Now, from a challenges perspective, you have the data subject can request for a copy free of charge. The data subjects can also directly enforce financial compensations. Technical and organizational measures should be specific and be related to the processing. Records of processing, including onward transfer, should be maintained. Implementation of additional and supplemental measures, and revise all OCC templates. And it's a huge administrative burden there. Now, from the outcomes on the new requirements, these are some of the four major things which probably organizations should adopt in order to meet the SEC requirements. One, it has to meet the requirements of the SCRIMS 2 guidelines, which is clearly significantly been covered. Then also review those technical and organizational measures as part of the transfer impact assessment carried out, and ensure what kind of supplemental measures or additional guarantees that can be extended to the other country, which is the data exporter, to meet compliance from a SCRIMS or the SEC GDPR perspective. Also, the risk-based approach, to wait and see on the approach, because the laws are evolving. There are new laws that comes into existence, so that there needs to be a constant evaluation of the current transfer requirements. And this SEC document needs to be, constantly be updated in line with the changing laws and regulations. And this is one of the most important key factor you need to meet in order to ensure that your SEC that you have executed is in line with the expectations set, specifically the European essential guarantees that were recommended by the European Data Protection Board, and also on the model changes. The last but not the least, the modes of deployment has been consistently, we have been seeing several changes. As part of the industry practices, there are both old school as well as new schools. I mean, when we talk from old school, you had a DPA, which is a separate document. You had SEC, which is a separate document. Whereas when the new schools, you potentially see that either the DPA, which is the 915 document, is mandated to be executed, referencing to standard contractual clauses, which most of the industries, specifically from the US region, try to adopt that kind of standards, or big, large vendors try to adopt that. Or we also see from a new school where we have DPS with SEC, where each modules are separately executed and maintained. So where it's just more from an old school, but it is much more where the people are very clear in terms of how each and every parties are clearly their roles and responsibilities as part of an organizational processing is appropriately being taken care. So this is also you potentially see it. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, there are three questions. I will just put the question one after another to you. Yeah?
Sure.
Yeah, this is from Reena Bengeri. Can the vendor DPS be updated for relevant sections in terms of list of parties? That is, can the irrelevant roles like transfer controller to controller text be removed, or Is it mandated to keep all the annexures as it is?
Okay, so typically it depends on a person. So if there is a particular engagement that you have with the vendor, and if that role with the vendor is you as a contract as a controller, and the vendor is a data processor, then all that you need to do is ensure that they process everything. And when you come exactly to the modular ones, you need to just choose model 2 for it, and you can execute only the model 2. You don't need to have the model 1, model 3, and model 4 applicable there. Now, if the same vendor that you do use as part of your engagements, okay, so there are transactions where as part of your client, you have the same vendors part of your own solution programming. So if you have a vendor X who is not only a vendor who is processing your data, but as part of this vendor or the partner is also part of your engagement that you have with a particular client. And while with that client, the client is a controller and you end to become a processor. And you also have this particular service provider who's also been brought into this engagement where he also acts as a processor. Then in such case of vendors, you can have module 2 and module 3 part of your SCC, and you can remove module 1 and module 4 out of your SCC template.
Very good. Thank you. Great. There are two questions from Jai Nine. One, is it justified to seek additional recourses in the form of indemnities in a DPA from a data processor point of view?
Yes, provided your indemnities that you do seek, one is from a compliance perspective, because you're also, in case if there are certain provisions which are very not acceptable from a standard point, as well as from your local standpoint, processing such data is not, then you have a moral or you have a legal obligation to duly notify them under Article 28. But in terms of other indemnities, now, as a data processor, while you engage and support for a client, you also end up providing some of your own employee data to them. Say, for example, in this particular pandemic, and now the client decides that, okay, I would like to make sure that people who are planning to visit back offices, I would like to issue ID card to them, so that I would like these people to come and work from my own offices and make utilize of the capabilities. Now, it is your employee, and your employee data is now expected to be given to the client, who is actually collecting and processing it from its own business processes. But at the end of the day, you still want to be a controller, and you are liable in the event, because your data vicariously you are liable because your data is being given by your employee to the client as part of that particular relationship that exists between you and the client. So keeping that in mind, you can have certain reverse indemnities and liabilities protecting your interest when such kind of issues arise where your own employees sues against you for non-compliance to GDPR.
Oh, great. Thank you. Next question. Is it justified from a data processor perspective to agree to provide additional? Yeah, this is, I think, sorry. What are your considerations for choosing the governing laws for SECs where the controller or processors are not based out of European Union?
SECs where the controllers or processors
are not based out of European Union.
No, so typically the governing laws for SEC is very limited and straightforward. It is where the data exporter is established.
Yeah.
Second, where the data subjects or belong to, or where the data originates from within the European member states.
Right.
If it belongs to EU data, which is not within, which is a data which is not within EU, I don't think the requirement of SEC does arise as part of that engagement. So, but however, we have also seen this concept of SEC has been adopted by other legislations which have recently come into force, such as Dubai. We also have an intra transfer agreement that UK is currently in the public consultation mode. We also have New Zealand come with a similar data transfer agreement for its processors for recently as part of their amendment. The Turkey already has a standard contractual clauses. Argentina has its own standard contractual clauses. South Africa is already in the making of the standard contractual process, along with Brazil is also one of the entity from LGPD standpoint. So now the challenge is when you have a global engagements, you having multiple standard clauses, which is also cumbersome. So as of now, there is no clear directions what is legal and what is not legal. As long as we are trying to make sure that we are covering like the similar concept that I was mentioning within the EU data, when you're processing Switzerland data, you need to have an additional annexure covering the requirements of the Swiss laws applicability where Swiss data is being processed. The governing law is much more requirement there. So I think the same approach will go for most of the other jurisdictions which are coming with the standard contractual clauses.
Great. Thank you. Last question, I think, before you start your moderating session. This is from Mr. Partha Chakravarti. How do the European Union Commission approved SCC reconcile with what is envisaged in our PDPA? Can an European Union individual enforce SCC in the Indian court? If yes, under which Indian law / statute? Need citation, please.
Citations, definitely, I'm not going to give anything on the legal capacity, even though I come from that background. But Partha, so the point is, it's very simple. Yes, the European Commission, when it the EDPB published its, the EU Commission published its standard templates of contractual clauses. It is envisaged that most of the countries has to adopt to its jurisdictional requirements. Okay, from an extraterritorial jurisdictions, it is still left for a debate at a much larger. But whether an individual from Europe can exercise a right against a country, which is a third country, such as like India, where any data breach or violation or anywhere government access led to his or her rights, yes, definitely. I think under our Indian constitutional Article 14, every individual has a right to equality, which not applies only to the citizen, but also to the people who have been subjected to harm in the Indian ground. So even to non-citizens as well. So I think we do have in our own constitutional the rights where an EU individual can exercise these rights in the courts for any specific remedies that may be called for. I'm happy to get any kind of differences and around it, because this is a topic which is much more evolving. We have not seen significant cases to that effect, but definitely based on this is also one of the major assessments that you need to carry out as part of a transfer impact assessments. And this is something which has been widely adopted and considered also.
Great. One more last question before this is from Reena Bengeri. Rajesh, is UK also coming out with their SCCs? When are they expected to be rolled out?
They're currently in the public consultation phase, so probably we should expect sometime in the next quarter.
Oh, excellent. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for your all the answers. And I think we shall proceed with our moderating session. Thank you very much.